we serve. Students write all kinds of things in first-year writing classes at university, and I think we should be very careful about who has access to being able to do strings of data from that and pulling out particular students that they determine are dangerous. So this student's essay raises two questions for me. One, it's a concern of whether a student's text will be more easily scanned and tagged because of specific syntactical strings that mark a student as dangerous. But it's also true that the student's essay and others from the student school becomes a marker within a data bank of the level of development and complexity of students writing at that institution. And that's interesting for issues of university rankings, particularly when organizations outside universities are helping to shape assessment concerns. Depending on program framings, depending on limitations to data collections, whose data will be seen as adequately robust remains to be seen. I think about our own data collection decisions and how data may or may not offer a valid snapshot of what might be happening in any of our classes. We are charged with creating an assessment plan for a first-year writing program, a program that teaches about 3,000 students a semester, and we work with those students for 2 semesters. So those 3,000 students create about 24,000 documents over the course of those 2 semesters. Faced with the challenges of somehow adequately gathering a snapshot of that labor, and I start to have a sense of why data clouds become interesting to me, because obviously we can choose to get at that data much more quickly and much more efficiently based on programs that are out there. For the sake of showing some of the possibilities, let me suggest some of the ways that people approach this labor within our discipline. Some writing programs use mycomplab.com by Pearson, which is used to facilitate assessment while also providing a more viable program for students. In other words, if students will support financially the challenges of assessment, this option offers them a range of resources that would be handy while writing. So you're not necessarily only just telling them to charging them for the program, the assessment part. So my CompLab includes a portfolio option, which allows a student to upload all of his or her writing for his or her class, a portfolio framing that allows an administrator like me access to all of the classes in our program and all of the writing from students. Pearson, by the way, has shaped the way that they input that data so that it's much easier for them to move through it quickly. They've only finally allowed for you to have different kinds of documents within it so that it can actually reflect the kinds of writing students do. Google is the next option that people use at a national level for this work. Local IT specialists can create templates and framings that allow a program like ours to adequately gather and even perhaps assess the data without a lot of coordination, and the IT department relies on Google to provide protection and security. We have something called Georgia View, which is a version of WebCT, which Blackboard bought quite a while ago, and they're getting rid of WebCT, thank God. But like myComplab, students and teachers can upload documents. The problem comes in this one in extracting the files, creating the databases, and organizing the logistics of reading the files, entering data, and compiling scores. There are several of these professional companies, Chalk and Wire, TaskScream, and LiveText. And I've been trying to see who they might be related to in larger framings. So Pearson is a pretty strong, large company, and so they may actually be subsidiaries or about to be subsidiaries of that kind of company. So Chalk and Wire is a program developed by the Communications Research Center in Ottawa, which facilitates not only the uploading of portfolios, but the reading of the text by the faculty and the data analysis. What's really interesting about all of these programs is that they're not subject to any government regulation that I can tell. So it's a really a curious industry. So, and then there's a variety of DIY options, do-it-yourself options. Those, of course, come with the risks that we face. In the midst of computer gurus, the kinds of descriptions I have here are not that intriguing, perhaps, but for those of us who struggle to sort out possible viable decisions, there's a set of literacies that are not accessible and those who might discuss the implications of certain moves are not necessarily able or willing to discuss the hazards of various decisions. And so it becomes unclear whether one is engaging in necessary or unnecessary hand-wringing, worrying over what will happen when our students submit their data to these places. For those of us who must do assessment in the time of fleeting resources with few remaining internal options, these external companies suggest viable resources, but they trade in data and algorithms in ways that are always unclear, and the ability to make informed or wise decisions about privacy feel limited at best. That said, I think there are relatively simple solutions to this set of concerns that involve gathering a network of scholars through online networking scaffolds who are in field and who can provide our own ranking and rating system for each of these companies based on our own criteria for assessing their policies, their relations to philanthropists, to think tanks, and to politicians. We need, in other words, to access data cloud options and provide data as a collective that may help us to communicate with these corporations. It's very clear that we're very separated out in doing this work across the nation, and yet this work would be much better put together if we did collaborate in some way. I want to talk just a quick minute about assessment and philanthropy and the sort of larger scale issues that I see pushing this assessment in its current climate. I would be less inclined to join forces to figure out ways to articulate the implications of various resources if there weren't also this rising and troubling interest in assessment that I would argue is driven by influential philanthropists. While it is not within the scope of this talk to articulate this, the influence of individuals like Bill Gates, if I had more time to create the argument, I would try to suggest that in the midst of the loss of tax revenues from the wealthy for the government, with the rise of philanthropists who get to choose where they donate their money to education, they are able to control the conversations and the directions for assessment within the United States more than they may have in the 80s and 90s. You can see debates over these kinds of values and who should win in exchanges between Bill Gates and Diane Ravitch. Though the relationship between education and philanthropists always has existed, their influence at this point feels pervasive and ominous and without government regulation, so that the rise in assessment imperatives colludes with this data management in ways that would make your average academic like me prone to paranoia. You can see the scope of this influence in companies who are working to participate in significant assessment services. You can take Pearson, for example. In 2003, they acquired Edexcel, a company that provided testing in England and in 85 other countries. Recently, they've been involved in submitting a bid to provide testing for the PISA assessment, and they have developed technologies that automate the assessment of writing and speaking, a curious move for the likes of people like me. The future prospects for Pearson are extensive, and what is interesting to me is to see the strategic gathering of data that can later be used in ways that are not seen at the time. So when a teacher is required to use my comp lab because a writing program decides it's a valuable tool for assessment and also for students trying to sort out the challenges of writing, and students submit extensive numbers of written documents as part of a portfolio, Pearson gathers data that later can be used to create additional resources for university writing programs, in assessing viable entry points for students, or in providing resources similar to turnitin.com. These are incredibly powerful companies at this point who make a good dollar off of students. So I've mentioned this concern several times in this talk, but I want to say it again. What is perhaps most troubling is that places like Pearson develop tests without regulatory oversight. People invited to participate in their conversations about the assessments are strategic, but not necessarily representative of a disciplined sense of what should be assessed. With this example of Pearson and the example of Bill Gates, while this example does not explicitly address surveillance, at this point I think I've established enough of a suggestion of the ways in which a student and faculty data might be mined. I think it's not a leap to suggest that at this point, various intriguing trails of data are available for those interested in surveillance. And if I had more time, I would slow down here and explain the very large concerns that I have between histories and traditions of surveillance and the move to a larger assessment agenda. However, I'd like to close by suggesting just one viable strategy for addressing my own ignorance and illiteracy. Peggy O'Neill and Linda Edner-Kastner argue that following the following about the need to participate in the assessment discussions happening in a variety of venues. These assessment discussions affect everything about our courses and programs, who is admitted to them, how they are taught, how students, courses, and instructors are evaluated, what counts as valuable in them, in essence, everything that motivates writing instructors to do their work. I would add to O'Neill and Adler-Kastner's argument and suggest that we should not only try to sort out strategies for participating in existing discussions that often occur far outside the range of writing experts, but we should start to develop criteria by which we judge programs that facilitate our assessment practices. We should routinely investigate these companies and be aware of the consequences for programs of faculty participation with these corporations. And we should publish our results, regardless of our alliances with different corporations. At this point, writing faculty are often targeted by these corporations, and you become a Pearson person or a Bedford person. So, while each department's decisions about assessment are minuscule in the large picture, they contribute significantly to the amalgamation of data. We should be taking a more active, collective approach by setting the guidelines and responsibilities. I should conclude by saying that there are some very interesting faculty and field who have been doing this work for a long time, but in the main, people like me continue to make decisions about assessment without an adequate network in which discussions about viable options can be heard. Thank you.
Microphones. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That was really fascinating. Does anyone have any questions for her? Okay. I'm going to come bring the mic to you.
Hi. I have a prior question to the sort of questions you're answering. I think it might enable us to understand a bit more the challenges that you're facing. You said that you're assessing 3,000 students per semester on this course, and they submit 24,000 pieces of work, or something like that.
Yes.
How many teachers or teaching assistants, or how many different people are assessing these 3,000 students?
Well, those are the sort of questions you have to decide when you set up your assessment plan. So what we're trying to do is pull from the data from students, maybe selected sampling, and then the expert readers will be from the faculty who teach the course regularly.
I'm just trying to get an idea of the sort of workload that an individual assessor would be under.
The main thing that, it depends on the university and it depends on what kind of funding is available. So we're going to try and do is the minimal. But some universities look at every student's writing over the course of their college career, which is an extraordinarily large task. We don't, and we won't do that until there's funding for it.
The reason I ask is because I'm from a, as you might be able to tell from the UK, from slightly different backgrounds, where we're taught in, well, I was taught in extremely small groups of people, so it's quite a cognitive stretch to be able to understand the way you're going about it. Just the second part to that question then. So what sort of feedback do the assessors provide to the students? What does it look like?
Yeah, this again depends on what kinds of programs you use. So if what we do is look at every student, then what we can do is maybe set up a particular type of program that gives feedback to each student. But in this case, students will likely have no feedback from us. So this is only to assess the validity of the program. So, but this is one of the few places in the United States universities that are state kinds of places where students have small classes. So they're typically taught by 1 to 25, so 1 professor, 25 students. They should be at 1 to 15. So that's where we're at.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Raise your hand. Okay. I have one actually, which is how strongly regulated are the companies providing those services with regard to FERPA? I mean, how well do they respect the law, and how strong is the law?
You know, this is a place where it's difficult to know. I mean, I don't have that's not my area of specialization, so I don't know to answer the question. But the people in my discipline who look at this are always exceedingly nervous. So in part, the data management, it's very clear that Gmail for example, Google Docs and Google Apps are mined by